Welcome everybody. Mike, would you please open the meeting for us?
I noi mātou. I hoa whare mātou ki a tuen I tēnei ata. Manakitia ia mātou I kōre o rero ana rā mea pāna ki te rohe whānui a ngā te kahangunu. Ko te tumana ko te ngākau ka tai te rangi maere ki a mātou ki ronga I tēnei tūmo mō kōre o koe nei mea. Ka pātai ki ronga ti ngā krauti ake amen.
Thank you, Mike. I'd also like to acknowledge the death of Toro's mother. Mike and I went to the tangi yesterday, and it was a really great occasion, and we got to hear, although it was all in Te Reo, of course, but I was lucky to have someone telling me what was going on, and to hear her life, quite a stunning woman, and a stunning life, and a stunning contribution to especially our Māori community, but to our entire community. So, passing, we will pass eventually. Any apologies? No apologies. Notices, we have notice, Tom, you want to, you got a notice on the railway?
Just an update, Chair, a question in relation to the recent media around the washout at, I think it's at Raupanga, on the line reinstatement work. We don't know a lot more than Kiwi Rail is saying publicly. I think it's reasonable to expect there will be some delay, but they're still undertaking an assessment of the cost and timing of that delay. But apart from that, my understanding is they still remain committed to the reopening of the line, and are still continuing to work very closely with the Port of Napier on the commercial terms of what that might look like. In terms of Council's continuing support, we are in some respects waiting for the outcomes of the commercial negotiations between Kiwi Rail and the Port. But we are certainly indicating that we remain, committed to supporting the reinstatement of the line, and there's been a couple of areas that we may be able to target our support in terms of development of railheads, but again, those terms need to be fleshed out. It may be that as a result of this washout that we are asked to make some contribution, or or figure out how we can help if there's any significant additional cost. And I've just indicated to Kiwi Rail that we'll absolutely remain open to receiving any proposals, noting that they did absorb all the additional costs relating to the Esk flooding earlier in the year. So that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Tom.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add?
Yes, certainly, Alan.
My understanding is that work is still carrying on signals and installation of signals and that sort of thing. So, there's been some indication that they're undecided as to what the future will be. Or I'm very confident that it'll be fixed, and they'll carry on this. Two significant investment made already for abandonment. The other thing is that I had a visit a week or so ago from Mainline Steam, who are the biggest rail steam tourism operator in New Zealand. They want to operate on the line once it's opened. However, we've got a little unresolved problem with Kiwi Rail at this stage, because at this point they're saying the line is going to be for freight only. Well, up at the Gisborne end, there's a vintage heritage steam train runs there, so I can't see where the consistency is, but we'll progress that at the right time.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Tom. To have a steam train on our Wairua line would be sensational.
They want to run up.
Sensational.
They actually only want to run up to Holt's Forest, so reasonably short day trips, particularly to fit in with cruise ships. And over the Art Deco period and that sort of thing. I think it'd be a really good asset.
It would be. Okay, are there any conflict of interest on anything, new conflicts? We're always trying to think of them. Do we have one? No? There are no more extra conflicts. Okay, confirmation of the minutes from Wednesday the 12th. For accuracy, short minutes. Do we have a mover? We have Fenton and second by Peter. All those in favour? Aye. Minutes of the last meeting are carried. Follow-ups, item 4.
Take this as read, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Questions on the follow-ups?
We have one, Chair. Just through you, Chair, or through you, James, for Malcolm, if you could print me out a copy of the catchment management plan for Thames Tyne Street consent, and just put that in my box downstairs here, it'll be fine.
Peter?
Yeah, I've got a follow-up in relation to item 6, which is the HBRC implementation working group meetings, of which there are none scheduled. It was announced very recently that Hastings District Council has been able to rezone 55 hectares on the fringe of Havelock, which has caused a certain amount of angst in some circles in Hastings and Havelock North. And I don't believe, but I'm looking for confirmation that those 55 hectares were ever earmarked through the HBRC process, and I'm looking for a confirmation of that one way or the other.
My understanding is that it was not inconsistent with HBRC, but the precise status of it in terms of the allocation of that land under the plan would need to come back to you. I don't know whether you know off the top of your head.
I can find out, but that was also the one that was done subject to this new special planning process.
Yes, it
under
was.
legislation.
So, yes, that's right. So it didn't go through the normal channels.
It wasn't on the little maps we were given.
Although we were certainly consulted on the plan variation.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
So I've got
Tom, and then Debbie.
Sorry, there was one other thing that I'm interested in doing. And I know this is a thing that I bring up pretty often, is the potential loss of high quality land around the fringes of Hastings, which I have witnessed throughout my entire lifetime. Nobody is taking this seriously, in my view, and it is an incredibly serious matter. I'm wondering whether so that we are able to demonstrate just what has happened, what I'm wondering is whether we're able to draw up a street map decade by decade, starting around, say, the beginning of the Second World War, which would be 1939, 1940, something like that, just to show what's happened with Hastings every decade for the last 60 years, because people will find that there's more than 2,000 hectares of land has just been taken and gobbled up a little bit at a time. It's an extraordinary amount of land that's been lost, and it's some of the best productive land in the world, and all these rubbish excuses given as to it not being productive or whatever. And I think people need to understand just exactly what's happened, and then they might realise that we've got to do something about it. Is that possible?
Chair, can I suggest we come back to Council with a view of the resourcing implications of doing that, because I suspect it will require accessing historic aerial photography and piecing it all together. And so I just want to have a view of how big the job is. I would note that some of the encroachment, obviously not the subdivision, but some of the encroachment has gone into infrastructure that supports the primary sector use of the plains, such as cool stores and associated support industries as well. So not all of the industrial encroachment of that land will be inimical, if you like, to the primary sector performance in the horizontal zone.
I hear what you're saying, and that's correct to some degree, but I'm not so much talking about that. I'm talking about the encroachment of the community.
Yep. Understood. We'll come back to you on that.
They just before I go to the questions, they have done that with Israel, and it's really interesting. Starts a little dot, and then.
Yeah.
So, Tom.
Just further to the first part of Peter's question, could you also, while you're checking that HBRC's business, check out the recent announcement of whatever, a couple hundred units in Miani, the swamp we call Miani, and Was that contemplated in the HPUD's plan? And will we have an opportunity to comment on that particular development?
Okay, we'll have to.
Mr. Chairman, as a past representative on HBRC, I'm appalled that there have been no meetings of the governing group, and I would suggest that Councillor Bevan and Councillor Belford, if he's still involved, I'm not, I resigned, should actually call for a meeting and get that group working again and get an understanding of what's been approved and what hasn't. So it's not just guesswork.
No, that's right. And the group needs to have teeth. I don't know how we get it teeth. Debbie.
I have a follow-up from agenda item 10 in our local members' determination, which we were dealing with in the current financial year. And I'd like to request as an action a workshop around how the extra duties pool is divvied up to be effective for this current year. And I bring this request to you, Chair, as a result of discussions with a number of people around the table, and including the Chief Executive. And from the discussions that we had on the day of our last meeting, some councillors expressed other areas where they felt that they should be reimbursed for. So I'm fully supportive of opening up that discussion, because at the moment when we look at our annual plan that's just been, what's the annual report that's just been about to be signed off, so from 1st of July to 17 to 30 June 18, what we're in effect paying that extra $13,000 for is 4 CNS meetings, 5 ENS, 4 RTC and 2 hearings committee meetings. And I know that you indicated that there were other things that different members were doing within their roles, but what we're signing off on, for instance, is under the hearings committee, 2 meetings. Those 2 meetings, the combined total for the year was 45 minutes, which works out $279.51 per minute. So I think we need to be having a good hard look at that and making sure that we are looking at the roles of all of the councillors and making sure it's far more transparently represented than the distortion that's in the current reporting.
Do you want a workshop on that? I think that's probably a good idea. Have a chat about that.
And not next year, workshop, can we put a timeline on this happening?
Look, we'll schedule one adjacent to a council committee meeting in the next couple of months, and we'll work with the chair on the timing of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments on HBUD?
Sorry, Chair, can I just go back to Councillor Hawke and just clarify the request? Are you wanting to understand what consultation has occurred in relation to Niani development?
It's 2 things. I saw the announcement, and like Peter's reaction to the one in Havelock North, I just sort of, it just didn't strike me that would have been in the HPUD's plan, given the sensitivity of that land to water issues, sewage issues, and so forth and so on. And so I was surprised to see it. And then secondly, I guess, so first question is, was it blessed within the HPUD's framework? And then the second part is, did we comment on it as part of the consenting process they must have gone through, or have they filed a consent with us for those aspects of it, wastewater, et cetera?
So, look, I might be well off the pace here, but we did engage with Napier City Council over a very small subdivision involving...
this is a major retirement village.
Right.
Is this Bupa Investments?
Yeah.
Is this the Bupa Investments? Yeah. So we did submit on that, and I can get you, and we would have received responses
Mr.
from Napier City
Chairman,
Council, so I can...
Gavin knows this stuff backwards.
Yeah, look, but just Gavin's not present today, so we just need to take that offline. But I just wanted to clarify what the request was. That's fine, Councillor.
Well, Mr. Chair, if we're making inquiries and or reporting back on the role HPUDs is playing, particularly in regard to both Hastings and Napier subdivisions, can we also include a report on Park Island and responsiveness there? And let's be clear on the request around the development the two developments, one in Miani Township itself, which is already well completed almost, and then there's a further down Willowbank Road past the Boys High, which is a retirement environment. So some commentary on that, and Tiara Ave, throw that into the mix as well.
Chair, can I suggest that we bring back a report, a consolidated report around HBUD's implementation and some of these all of these subdivisions which have an impact. Pick up the question about the a meeting and bring it all together into a single paper.
And that, if I could, that might address some of the things that are left unanswered in this short blurb as to whether HDC is in fact the inheritor of leadership on this, and is that the direction we want to pursue, and et cetera. Talking about a handoff here and a need to engage Napier and Hastings Council on whether or not they actually want to hit the go button, as you say in the report. We're sounding like we want to hit the go button. So could you report on that?
Well, I mean, that's the crux of the issue, isn't it? That we have HBUD, but it's just a talk fest. In the end...
Well, it's not even that. It's not doing anything.
No, it's not even a talk fest at the moment. But when they do have a chat, it's just a talk fest and you can make recommendations, but nobody has to listen to you. So it's kind of a bit frustrating for everyone being there, really. We got those really excellent maps. None of those two things were on those maps because I looked at them really closely. But, you know, having said that, our cities have got to go. We're in a growth mode and our cities have got to go somewhere. And that's the bottom line.
Either up or into the hills.
Yeah, well, that one, the Havelock one is into the hills a little bit.
Not really.
On Tomato Peak.
Not really.
It's
Peak, yes.
there's never been a crop there as long as I've been around. Okay, do we have someone to move the recommendation?
Before you move, Mr. Chair, there's an action item I'm just interested to know the Lagoima requests scenario, and we're aggregating those. These are Lagoima requests made to HBRC. Are there, and should we in fact report Lagoima requests made by HBRC as well, incorporate those responses as a part of this reporting?
Look, I can't see any reason why not. We don't tend to make them very often. It's in inordinate circumstances. We'll have a chat with the management team about whether there's any issues with doing so. As I say, it's very few and far between, but in principle, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't or couldn't.
Sure. It just occurs to me that for the sake of the public record, and particularly in light of a recent request made, we ought to have that documentation into the public record.
Understood.
Yeah, I had some thoughts on the Lagoima. I thought staff answered really well some of those requests, especially the one on remuneration of Mr. Munro. So do we have a mover to accept, to receive and note those follow-ups? Peter, seconder, Paul, all those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. Call for items not on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Alan.
I'm going to ask about the Maori Carbon Trust and how that intersects or overtakes the relationship with Ngāti Kahungunu.
Do you want us to answer that now, or do you want to?
Or do it. Do it at the.
Is it a council matter?
Well, no, it's a good question. It's a very good question. Tom?
Concrete in the Karamu.
Concrete in the Karamu.
Mm-hmm.
Now, mate, is this the second lot or was it the first lot?
Not sure.
Oh.
45,000 people want to know.
Debbie?
All subscribers.
I have a handful. I'd like to brief you on the Toki task force that's been implemented, and the Rotary River Pathways Trust meeting that I've had, and an Upper Toki site visit meeting.
Any other? Okay, we will take them on. Let's move to item 6, recommendation from the Environmental Services. Tom, the floor is yours.
right. I will just comment on a few of these and take the report as read. Much of the discussion at that meeting did occur around the Anga Anga Tukakino board issues, and this report pretty well explains what happened. I think everybody was at the meeting where this discussion occurred, or most of us were. There is an issue on the table here as to the nature of a position we should take, if any, on the Tranche 2 applications, whether we should provide any direction of any sort with respect to public notification of those, which I presume will be something councillors want to discuss further. The forestry/management discussion, I think the recommendations pick up the fact that there's councillor interest in having a forum on the forestry issue, the regulatory aspects of it, how things are going to proceed, and so forth. I think there was a consensus that was a good idea. I would call attention to item 7, the call for certificate of appreciation nominations, that we were asked to give our individual nominations on that, I think by the end of this month, so that those could be assembled, digested, so that the council could react to those at the October meeting. So just to note that that is an invitation to all councillors to do that. I think that's all I would comment on to lead off. But as I said, I suspect the item here that councillors may want to discuss has to do with the Anga Anga situation and the report on that.
Thank you, Tom. I put my apologies in that meeting because I was just returning from China and always get the
That's
dates
right.
wrong. Always get the time lag wrong. I was pretty disappointed, actually. It's a tough word, isn't it? That you didn't make a strong recommendation to publicly notify the Tranche 2 water. Do you want a discussion on it? I thought
Well, we did actually. That was the outcome of the discussion, but we had, I think, 3 councillors who abstained from that vote, I think in part because they are all potential hearings committee
okay, well that's fine.
members, so that was sort of off the table. They were sort of out of the mix. And then of the balance, we had a voice vote, which I determined carried the motion to instruct public notification of those consents. So that was the outcome of the committee meeting, but as you see in this report, it's being contested by the staff who feel that's an inappropriate direction for councillors to be given, and they've raised some other options in there.
Oh, yeah, you better come on, James.
So Chair, the principal concern we have is around predetermination when we're in a Section 92 process to obtain further information from the applicants. If council is of a mind to withdraw the delegation on this, we would recommend that you ask that the notification decision for this consent be brought to council for consideration, and at that point, based on all the available information, you then make a decision whether notification is appropriate. To do that at this point risks creating a risk of judicial review around that decision, and so we wouldn't think it's prudent to do so until such time. Our overall advice, though, is that course of action shouldn't be necessary. That staff will be giving due consideration to all of the issues and recognise the the significance, both in terms of the environmental effect and the public interest in these resource consents, and therefore we have said publicly, certainly I've said publicly, that notification is likely, but that we won't make a final decision on that until all information is available. If Council is concerned about the judgment of staff on this matter, then I would suggest you direct us to provide you with the opportunity to make that notification decision, but not at this time predeterminedly decide that it needs to be notified.
Tom, as Chair, are you happy with that?
Well, I'd like to put some questions and debate this a bit. First of all, in section 5.1, there are reasons given, one of which is special circumstances. I assume that any of those three reasons that are given would constitute grounds for public notification. Not all of them are required, any one of them, correct? So a determination that special circumstances existed would be sufficient, correct?
I think with respect to 5.12, and correct me if I'm wrong, Malcolm, that could be limited notified if there is a small number of affected persons that are close by. I would make the observation that the withdrawal of 15 million cubic metres from the groundwater resource in Ruataniwha represents nigh on a 50% increase in the taken water. So therefore the affected persons by that is probably quite widespread, and therefore limited notification is probably reasonably unviable given the breadth of interest, if you like.
So on the matter of predetermination, did the Regional Council not in fact take a position against Tranche 2 water during the Board of Inquiry?
That's correct, but I guess, again, in preservation of due process, we're reserving our position on this until all the information is in.
We think the circumstances have changed?
Until we receive the information from the applicants, we're not in a position to make a final judgment as to whether they have or not.
I think part of the sentiment for pushing ahead on this and making this determination now is that the farmers down there, irrigators down there, wanted some certainty about their immediate future here, to say nothing of the folks who were feeling that their bores were affected. What's the fastest rate at which you would expect a decision could be made on this matter? In other words, what I'm getting at is, in the summer irrigation season about to confront these guys, is there any likelihood whatsoever that we would arrive at a decision on allocating Tranche 2 water?
I'll defer to Malcolm on that.
I don't believe we will. We've discussed with the applicants the need for more information. They've gone away to get that, and they've informed us just recently that won't be available until next year.
Next year.
So that information won't be back to us to be in a position to decide how
so
it
the
informs
practical
the
circumstance is that anyone listening to this discussion here today could walk away with the understanding that there will be no allocation of Tranche 2 water in the coming irrigation season.
Correct.
Correct. The other issue, it seems to me, is explain to me a substantial amount of work has been done and presented to some of us by folks concerned about the situation down there. If this were not notified, if the Tranche 2 applications were not notified, when would all of their work and point of view be tabled?
Well, that's probably part of what might come up through the tuki work task force. That whole issue is on the agenda to discuss with that community.
It's fine for discussion, but would have no legal standing in terms of you making a non-notified consenting decision, correct? It's just...
Yeah, that's something else.
It's out there in left field.
But I think the exercise is to inform people and to get better understanding about the impact of all the options on that community. So if the process leads people to better understand how groundwater behaves, that might allay concerns, or it might clarify how the consents need to be processed. bit of a chicken and egg in there.
Councillor, can I suggest that if the council collectively is concerned that there may be a decision of non-notification, that you withdraw the delegation for the decision on this from staff, and you direct that the decision on whether there be notification or not be taken by council when such time we have a full and final application from the 8 consent applicants.
Would we be ignoring your advice if we did that?
Well, look, the delegation is your delegation to staff on these matters, so you're within your rights to withdraw that delegation. But the critical point being that you don't decide whether or not notification is to occur until you are in the full receipt of the information.
And once that information's received, I think under the RMA, you've got to make a decision about notification within 20 days, is that correct?
Basically 10 days.
10 days.
10 days.
So we would need to convene a meeting of council urgently to make a decision on that once.
So I'm thinking an alternative could be that the hearings committee gets delegated the authority to make that decision.
And that would
Be
be
much easier to
that
call
would
a
be
meeting.
that would be the normal process for those sorts of decisions. But
Tom, what's your
I would
thought?
support that,
You would support what Peter's saying?
withdrawing the delegation and transferring it to the hearings committee.
and you will need a resolution of council to empower the hearings committee to make that decision without recommendation through. Otherwise, we'll still need 2 meetings.
Yeah, because you've got to do it in 10 days.
So would the staff be making the recommendation to the hearings committee?
In all likelihood, we would make a recommendation. Yes, I think that's correct. But look, speaking frankly about this, I think when you look at the tests under the legislation and you look at the scale and nature of effects, etc., the chances of this being non-notified are very low. We're just being careful that we're not going to make that decision until such time as we're in receipt of all of the information from the applicants.
Yeah, my personal thing, Tom, was to leave it as it is, given the conversation. Otherwise, we're transferring the decision to, unless we transfer it to ourselves at a later date. I don't want to transfer it to another third party. I think what you're getting around the table here is that everyone wants to make sure, this is so huge in Central Hawke's Bay, everyone wants to make sure that everyone in Central Hawke's Bay is heard on this issue, in fairness. So however we do that, it's got to be fair and reasonable to everybody, whether you're big or small. That's the feeling I'm getting.
Try to be democratic.
Yeah.
Wow, this is a new, I like this, new style. Would somebody, if that is the sentiment, would somebody suggest alternative language to recommendation number 4?
Given the public.
So probably under 4, given the public interest in the matter, that the decision to publicly notify the Tranche 2 resource consent applications, should they proceed, be determined by either council or council's hearing committee, whichever one the majority of councillors support.
That's fine. See you, John.
Okay.
Have a good day, mate. So,
And I'd sorry, Chair, if I could just add, probably want to just add on the end for completeness, and that the delegated decision on this matter be withdrawn from staff.
is everyone happy with that?
Yeah, make it clear.
Malcolm, is that?
No, that sounds fine.
Yep.
Just a matter of whether it's council or
I've-
hearings committee.
I've actually drafted some wording.
Oh, the lawyer comes out of him yet.
I just wonder, while you're putting that up, have you got it there ready to go?
I've got it right. I can just read it to you. Revokes the delegation to determine whether or not the applications for Tranche 2 water should be notified, and delegates that decision to the hearings committee.
No, council or hearings committee to be decided.
Right, the council or hearings committee to be decided, that's fine.
Who decides where it goes to the council or hearings committee?
We do.
Oh, so it's then the decisions to the council. Hearings committee's cut out.
Well, maybe, maybe not.
But, but if the council's making the decision, he can then either decide at that point to take the decision itself or refer it to the hearings
Yeah.
committee. So the resolution should be just to the
Get that,
council.
Ben?
Peter, is that plural? Because
Yeah, I think so.
it's not a application, it could be one or could be many applications.
All y'all.
The applications.
The it is applications, yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Applications for Tranche 2 water.
Yeah, we got a thought on that? Are we happy on that?
I'll second that.
So,
Do
So-
we have a
so-
mover? Okay, we have a mover.
Sorry, Chair, just before you do move into debate on it, can I just make sure you're all clear that in making this decision yourselves, you'll want to be mindful of any previous statements that you have made publicly that could be used as a sign of predetermination in making that decision. So you just need to be aware of that risk, if you like, if any of you have made public statements to that effect.
So just a question on that, Chair. So what is the consequence of that?
It's a finely balanced legal question, really. In the event that the decision to notify was judicially reviewed, and I think the likelihood of the applicants themselves judicially reviewing that decision is relatively low given the nature of the consents and consent applications. But if they did, the court would have to weigh up whether due process has been followed, whether you demonstrated an open mind, whether you considered all of the best available information in arriving at your decision. And it's just a small risk that if you have made statements previously that could be used as evidence against the argument that you have followed due process and weighed up all the facts with an open mind.
Could it also prejudice an outcome, i.e. further into the process?
I think that's highly unlikely. Theoretically, you could draw a thread right through to the final decision on that because the public notification will have a bearing on the submissions and on the nature of the actual consent hearing process. But look, it would be a very long bow to draw, I think.
So how do we stay politically free on this?
Well, I think
We abstain or we vote against it.
so. Certainly,
No,
abstention.
in terms of the long process, the long game, because it's going to be a long game.
Well, in all likelihood, that we would recommend that the consent be considered by independent commissioners, given the nature of this resource and the significance of the decisions. That will be a decision that the council will need to take in time.
I wonder if you might like a debrief on my Tuki task force at this point instead of at the end of the meeting.
That would be helpful.
if it's germane to this, it would be sensible.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. How long would it take you to do that, Debbie?
Not long. So as a result of the Ongatiko residents and their very serious concerns and the wider community concerns around all water issues, a Tuki task force has been pulled together. It is the Regional Council, in effect, reaching out to the community to explore options around groundwater management and science development in the catchment. And around the table we have got, I'm chairing it, well resourced and supported by the staff, and we've got District Council rep, water users, which comprise of surface water users, groundwater users, future applicant representatives. So we have a Tranche 2 representative around the table, fish and bird, forest and game, fish and game, forest and bird, sorry, and local tai whenua. And we have the Onga community water user representative in there as well. So this is about bringing all of the parties just around the table to start appreciating each other's issues. It's kind of like a few of us have been there before a few years ago with Ruataniwha. But this isn't about developing new policy, rewriting policy. It's about how we work within the current policy environment that we have. And there's going to be a lot of pain, but I just think in terms of where we're at, the appreciation that if you're on a surface water take, for instance, your ban days currently were 1 in 13 for 10 consecutive days of ban, and in the current season it will be 1 in 6.5, and with the next increase in surface minimum flows, it will be 1 in 3. So there's some huge implications. And obviously there's going to be some quite serious concerns as to why the Tuki catchment is not on a level playing field with the tank plan change going forward and those increase in minimum flows not actually being put into effect. So some of the solutions we're looking at are maybe there's a press release that's been sent out to everybody. I presume you've seen it. Managed aquifer recharge. How that might look in the catchment. Tom, you might like to add some more here.
Mr. Chair, would you mind if I just raised a point of order? Because I'm a little concerned that when considering this particular resolution...
So I'll cut to the chase. So one of the
can I finish my point of order, Mr. Chair? My point of order is this. I'm not trying to persuade the councillor from delivering her presentation. I'm suggesting that in light of this resolution in front of us, in fact, it argues some preemption around it and notification. What I'm hearing from the councillor is actually matters that could be by way of submission in a resource consent application notification process. So my concern is that in arguing them in relation to this resolution, we in fact are compromising that decision.
Well, I take that on board. We're just hearing...
One of the things in the Environment and Services Committee was we were discussing the issues with the Onga Township.
Yeah, I know, I appreciate what you're saying.
One of the presentations, and I think it probably should be given to all of the councillors because it's been given to the District Council and it's been given to this community, but it showed that since 2004, the flow, the actual water level, equilibrium level of the water in the Onga catchment has dropped a few metres, and so the science is clearly saying that. But what we've heard from the Tranche 2 representative was the fact that they're spending significant dollars as a group on the science, and they spoke about the fact that they don't have any desire to have a negative effect or impact on the environment, that there is this opportunity that the Board of Inquiry has raised and they're looking very seriously at it. So we got to just see another side where, I mean, if people are going to, what was the figure that they were talking about having invested so far in the science, Tom? $500,000?
I think that's wonderful, and that's part of the discussion. So I think Neil's point is right, that this is all going to be the reason that there is a view from some people in the community that it should be publicly notified because all of the stuff comes out
but
in that
if you're
process.
looking at the wider part of the discussion, which was around the Onga Tiko situation, where we as a council are actively doing something now in the community, and that should be going part way to alleviating some of the emotions and getting the decisions based on fact and science, not emotion. So the council is doing something. I don't think that they're just resting on their laurels.
No, and we don't think they are. I think the debate is whether we're going to, because I take on James's point, we need to be very careful here because this is, you could say it's emotional, but this could be highly politically charged in your area, and it is already, and it will get to us, and we'll get questions to us, and we could be conflicted whichever way we go, and we don't know all the facts. So, I want to make sure that everyone around this table is free to speak as well, without we get out getting a High Court judgment that we're predetermined, getting fooled by the process, really. So I just want to make sure we're really conscious of that we don't get caught and something happens that we don't necessarily agree with, or whether it could be the other way around, because we have a political point of view. So I'm very conscious of that. Well, how does that... So it does leave us in abeyance, and it does leave it in our hands, doesn't it? Yeah. But then we're conflicted with what we've previously said. Can't remember what I previously said.
So can we go back to
conflicted.
Can we go back to the resolution?
Yeah, let's go back to the resolution.
Sorry, Chair, is there any other discussion on other issues in the paper, or are we
Has it
just
been moved?
moving straight to
No,
recommendations?
it hasn't been moved and seconded. We are just focusing on this one thing. So, do you want to move the paper, although you want to change this? Change this,
Look, I'm happy to move it. There's a suite of recommendations here, which this is
including
part
your
of.
change.
So,
do you want to talk to the change, Neil?
well, what I suggest, Chair, is if there's any other issues that anybody wants to discuss in this paper, we should do that, and then come to the recommendations.
Okay.
As we're
I think that's a good idea.
proposing to modify.
Are there any other questions?
there are.
for Tom? Yes, Neil.
Can I just go to recommendation 2, accepting the Sustainable Homes Policy and Voluntary Targeted Rate Funding criteria? We had significant discussion around that, and I wondered whether Mr. Heaney might update us on where we've settled on the wording of the criteria. I note that there's no wording in the paper for us to reference. I'm unclear about where we landed.
Happy with the way that you can go through the point of view.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Curtin, the recommendation was that the 2 thresholds be combined for water storage and septic tanks and raised to $20,000, and that this is recorded in item 5.7 on the paper. There is no impact per se on the scheme and the programme because you appreciate it is fully recoverable. We have no idea at this stage what the uptake is likely to be, but Councillor Hewitt has indicated that there is not a great hunger for taking on additional debt to resolve the problems in Onga. We have talked about the possibility of the scope of the project, including pump replacement, and that's what I refer to in 5.7 as system. I also want to be very clear that rainwater and bore water supply is not, in terms of quality, the responsibility of the regional council. It remains with the consent holder or the property owner.
Well, thank you for that. There is the matter, though, of the wording in the draft document, and can we take it as read that there have been amendments and changes to the document to reflect what you are just tabled here? Is that correct?
Absolutely. I think I apologise for the confusion that was caused by combining 2 things in one table, and it was the wording, and we will clarify the wording.
So the end result is that the wastewater and storage option now has an opportunity up to $20,000 to be accessed. My other question essentially is you referenced it here, the scope, the breadth of those that work. Does the document place any restraint on the start and finish of the work, or is that a matter for staff to determine whether that's as a matter of discretion? Where have you landed on that?
Okay, I'll take your advice on that, Councillor. There are some things in terms of the criteria, in terms of what's included and excluded, that I mentioned when the paper was presented to the E&S committee, and they are around quantum, etc. One of the issues that has been discussed is whether or not additional drilling or maintenance could be included in the sustainable homes costs. My feeling, and I welcome your view on this, is that maintenance items should not be included, but anything that improves the sustainability of the water supply could be included.
Capital items only. Yep. That's what you're basically saying.
I appreciate the response. However, if we're producing a criteria that has words in it, is it clear that to any applicant what the extent of that is?
Chair, if you're comfortable and if the council's comfortable, can I suggest that Mr. Heaney work with Councillor Curtin offline just to share the vision and just make sure that you're satisfied with the wording as well?
It's not a matter of me being satisfied. It's we're about to adopt a criteria and we haven't settled precisely on its extent, and I'm just a little concerned about process around that. If it's open and held to be flexible, that's fine. If that's what we want to do, that's okay. But we need to be explicit around that. That's my...
That solution would seem to be the most appropriate at this point, to do it on a case-by-case basis. We don't know yet what the demands are going to be, and a judgment call will need to be made on some circumstances.
So, Mark, this is fantastic, really, that we've extended that to septic tanks and water storage, home water storage. I'm really interested in the uptake that we get, because there are a lot of really old septic tanks in the Karamu catchment, and make sure people, well, first the public relations, so they know about them, and what's the uptake going to be, because it's such a good scheme to help tidy up the Karamu. And I mean, there'll be other catchments just as bad, but it's the one I live in. So well done on this. Oh, well done on council on this. But let's get it specific so people know, and make sure that they do know about it. Any other questions on the paper, Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Question to you, James, regarding 3.3 and 3.4 and 3.5 in the paper. This is regarding delegations register. You mention in here that, especially in 3.3 initially comes up, that staff delegated the responsibility to authorise this decision are senior planner, principal planner and so on. Can you tell me in the current HBRC corporate structure charts where the senior planner role is, because it's not in there?
Look, I think as noted in the paper, there is not a senior planner at the moment within that group. So we've got principals and we've got planners. And that's a consequence of recently the one senior planner in the team being promoted to a principal from memory. So that's why they don't appear in there. So effectively at the moment, the lowest level that the delegation is operating at is at principal advisor level.
Right. So what you're suggesting to me is the current HBRC corporate structure charts that you've given us only include roles that are currently filled and not ones that you're intending to fill?
Where we have, so we don't have a vacancy for that role at the moment. So within the overall FTE allocation for that team, there is not a vacancy. That's correct in terms of a senior planner.
Sorry, I didn't quite follow you there.
So at the moment, there is no senior planner role in that team.
Yet you've authorised a delegation down to a senior planner role.
So the delegations are based on the possibility of there being a senior planner, and it may well be that one of those planners in the next year or two might be promoted to a senior planner based on its skills and experience.
So how many other, sorry, Chair, I can't help myself. So how many other delegations are in there, because it may or may not happen in the future?
Well, it's not a case of may or may not happen. It's a case of at various points in times we will have seniors in teams based on skill and experience. And when somebody progresses from being a senior planner to a principal based on skills and experience, we don't immediately then create a new role and backfill it. Same in the way as once a planner progresses to being a senior, we don't immediately create a new role. Otherwise, that would create constant fiscal creep, and we wouldn't be able to progress staff in terms of their growth and development in terms of becoming more senior, unless we had funding to create a new role and a new role, if you get my drift. So we did previously have a senior planner until relatively recently. We may well have one again within a few years. So the policy is based on that principle.
It doesn't tie in with, to me, that whole discussion you've just had, it doesn't tie in with what you've got in the corporate structure. So my understanding of corporate structures is what would be your ideal way of looking at things, the way that the structure works. And you haven't included, there's no senior planning role in there, and that's where I'm becoming confused, right?
So that is based on the currently relatively junior, so you've got 4 consent planners in there.
Yep.
The point being is that in the next few years, one or more of those consent planners may be promoted to being a senior consent planner based on their skill and experience.
Right, okay, in which case that role would then be included in the corporate structure.
It would be included in the corporate structure, but what it wouldn't mean is that we would then go and recruit another another planner to backfill.
So you're talking about people creeping up seniority.
Correct.
So on, okay, now I get where you're going. So the other issue that comes up in there is that you've, back to 3.3 again, the current process allows for consent planners processing the application to make a recommendation and for a second planner or the consents manager. So at the moment, one of your junior consent planners can pass over their recommendation to another junior consent planner to get approval for a consent. Is that what you're suggesting?
That's not my understanding, is that it would need to be the consents planner or the principal, or a senior or principal, as opposed to, I think this is just possibly a bit poorly written. Yeah, that's right. So it wouldn't be a junior planner and a junior planner making that decision together.
Well, certainly that's what it looks like in the paper.
I understand. That's
The next sentence perhaps then goes on to say who actually carries that delegation. So by second planner, that was more a reference to just a more generic.
I'm sorry, Chair. I want to emphasise this point because it says all the consents manager to peer review and authorise this decision. Authorise this decision.
Yes.
So the recommendation has been authorised by a second planner, according to the papers that we have in front of us.
Correct. But
the following sentence says,
if you read the following sentence, the responsibility to authorise only rests at senior or higher. So you have to read the two sentences together, but I appreciate that it's not as clear as it could be in the first sentence.
Okay.
Are you a cynical banker?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, well, it's certainly not the way it used to work with me in the bank, so it's all right.
Do you have anything else, Paul, or you've covered?
Yeah, no, that's okay. No, I'll wait till the
Alan
vote.
has a question.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, just coming back to this resolution up here, it needs a little amendment. It shouldn't say is delegated to the council. You don't delegate to the council.
No,
the council
no, that's correct.
Is decided by the council or its hearings committee, with staff delegations being withdrawn.
Is everyone happy with that? It's quite a big deal.
With that correction, I'll move.
Move the amendment. So we move all the recommendations, including the amendments, on the wall.
Yeah.
Tom, you should really move.
So the word be withdrawn or revoked, or doesn't it matter?
Revoked.
Delegation.
We've got bankers and lawyers here.
Apple pickers.
We'll let Alan move since he did move, and second. Now, is there any other debate? Do you wish to speak, Alan?
No, look, I think we spent nearly a day on this committee the other day, and we seem to be going over a lot of stuff. Some of it's worthwhile, some of it's not.
Tom, do you wish to speak?
Nothing further?
Anyone else wish to speak? We have Neil and Paul has had his hand up, and then Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm pleased that we're moving forward with the Ongatiko bore issues. I'm pleased with the setting up of the task force. I think that was a good way looking forward. I just hope that the residents of Ongatiko aren't disadvantaged in the long run. I think it's events beyond their control that have happened, and that would be sad to see as residents that have suffered from events beyond their control, that they have to actually be the ones that put their hands in their pockets and pay for the continued supply of water.
Paul, Neil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to point out that the resolution we're looking at removes or revokes the delegations which sat with staff to determine the notification matter, and they're assumed by council itself. That carries with it some burden to avoid preemption of that decision, and thereby some silence on the matter until that arises. I hope councillors appreciate that that's what the implications of that are. Those consent applications are not immediate. They won't arise for, I'm not sure what the time frame is, but it's not immediate. So therefore, it's beholding of councillors to hold their position until those consent applications are in front of us. It does carry that onus with the recommendation.
Thank you, Neil. Penton.
So on that basis, could you take that separately? Because I'm not going to support that. I'm not going to be constrained by that resolution.
What?
Number 4.
I have some sympathy with Fenton that we are politically constrained, but so okay, I think we should take it separately.
And
It does, and Neil's point is very valid. Are we constrained anyway, James? If our staff?
I was going to talk on that as well, actually.
Are we anyway in the
Well,
bind?
if staff are making the decision, then I think you're quite free to make whatever comments you like, and, because you won't be a decision maker in relation to the decision.
Is that your point, Fenton?
Absolutely, and I'll make another point, actually. This is how ECAN started to go down the gurgler and was replaced by commissioners, because the governors, through a lot of lobbying, started getting involved in the staff matters. Eventually they were removed. This is where it started, right here.
That's not entirely true either.
That's Toro's
Peter,
point.
have you got?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I will support the motion, but I want to echo the thoughts of Neil on this matter as well. I mean, we've been given a timely reminder by the staff, I think, about the risks of predetermination, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a view expressed publicly, and it doesn't mean that you can't express concerns about the problems that we have in that catchment. It just means that when you go into a hearing to determine the matter in a few months' time, you must go into it with an open mind. And that's what we all need to make sure that we have. So it doesn't mean that you can't express a view. All of us have biases and prejudices on matters like this at the beginning of a process, but the process will affect and change our biases and prejudices, and that's what the process should do. So as long as we all understand that we can express our concerns, but we must maintain an open mind on the matter, it's okay.
Just before, Rick, you're going to come on. Fenton, do you accept that? I don't. Okay, Rick.
Well, I'm going to abstain on this.
There's the answer.
Because there's two things here. What we are forgetting is these processes under the RMA are semi-judicial processes. They are to be free of politics. And when we were saying that we're reacting to local concerns and public concerns, we are drawing, under the guise of being democratic, politics into the process. And when you draw politics into the process, you're saying that you're going to be driven or pressured by the noise and the pressure of public opinion, when it shouldn't be that. Our democracy is built on the fact that justice is blind and that people are not subject to political decisions when they're being tried. That's the central part of this. And the worry that is being expressed here is that by the staff is that we are starting to look like we are getting into a political process. And so that's my concern about it, is that there has to be an arm's length, and when it's drawn into this council to make decisions about it, it's not at arm's length.
So, Rick, my question to you is, why aren't you voting against it rather than abstaining?
Well, because I want to maintain absolute independence on this.
On the particular that we're taking away from staff.
Well, no, I'm going to abstain from it, so I express no opinion other than my concern about the general. You can make your minds up, but at the end of this, I'll ask for my name to be recorded as abstaining. A rare move by me. I usually have an opinion on everything.
We haven't done.
No way.
Debbie?
I can't support this. At this point in time, I still have every confidence in the staff and their decision-making abilities, and until the facts are provided by the applicants with the application, then I don't think anybody's in a position to be making any predetermined moves. It's really important that these decisions are based on fact, not emotion. So I won't be supporting an emotive, and I won't be supporting an emotive knee-jerk reaction such as what I think this is.
Ricks. I was at the meeting too, and congratulate the staff on how it was run and the chair, Debbie. There's a lot of emotive stuff there driven by the people of Onga and Te Kōkeno, but I actually think that they're quite small players in a huge picture there, and we don't want to preempt anything, because the meetings that follow, if we're already in a corner, it will discourage them from carrying on with these meetings, I would think.
Oh, no, you want to reply if you want to say,
Yeah,
your
I'll
own.
wait.
So, oh no, we need you to talk now because we're probably going to have to vote on this.
Which I have no problem with voting on it separately. I guess the one factual question I have, is there anything to prevent us from asking the 9 applicants whether they would oppose public notification?
No, there's nothing to prevent that. And also, as an applicant, they can actually ask for it to be notified. They haven't, but they're entitled to.
If any one of them did, would that be determinative?
If one did out of 8,
Yep.
I don't think it would be determinative, but we are certainly looking at them as a group, and we're asking them to do their science as a group. So I think we would
Would it not be
treat them
prudent to
collectively.
put this, given the whole tenor of this discussion here today, would it not be a prudent step to go to these 9 applicants and ask if they would object to this process being publicly notified? And if the staff won't do that, I'm sure we can find somebody who will.
No, look, I think it's a good suggestion because it may well be that as a collective they accept that there's a likelihood here and that they should therefore make virtue of necessity and put people out of their misery, because there does seem to be an inordinate amount of anxiety about the prospect, as vanishingly small as the probability may be, that this won't be publicly notified. But given that this is a level of anxiety that won't dissipate, I think we should have the conversation.
Our chief executive has just said that it's a vanishing possibility. Now, this whole discussion of predetermination is ridiculous on its face.
Still a possibility,
I mean, it's
Councillor.
ridiculous on
Still
its
a
face.
possibility.
And we did just this with
You sound
respect
like
to
me
water
then, James.
bottling for exactly the same reasons, okay? So the precedent has been set, I'm afraid. But anyway, in any event, I will strongly support this motion.
I voted against it.
Okay, I think we have a divided council here. Basically, the issue is, do we leave it in the hands of staff, our professionals, to make this decision independently of any political influence, or do we hand it over to to us as politicians? That's the issue, really. We need to take a vote on it, on that, on those changes, on 4 as up on the wall, and we understand what we're voting on. So, all those in favour of the amendment?
Mr Chairman,
Yes.
I was the mover. It probably should have been Councillor Belford, but I was getting a bit
Yeah, you were the
frustrated.
mover.
We're moving recommendations 1.
No, 4.
Through
I just want to go
7.
straight to 4.
Pardon?
Straight to 4. The change at 4.
Okay, so you're not going to do anything about the other.
Yeah, we are. We're going to go back to them.
Huh?
We'll go back to them.
All right, fair enough. So you're going
I
to
think
vote
this
on,
is the substantive issue here. This is a really important decision.
vote on 2 separately? I think you should.
Why is that?
Well, because if there's division on 4, then it might pull down 2 as well at the same time.
I can't imagine it.
I can't see them linked, actually.
No, I know, but if you put them both together, they will be linked.
Not being
On the
We're on the same page.
Yeah, that's the only link I get. No, Alan, we're going to vote on the rest. I want to get 4 is a major for us as a council.
All we're voting on is number 4.
Number 4.
Just number 4.
Number 4.
Okay.
And understanding the issues that's involved there, so we all understand. Okay, all those in favour of the amendment number 4 is amendment on the wall?
Aye.
Against?
No.
No.
Division.
Show of hands, please.
We have a division. All those in favour raise their hands on 4. 3. Sounded like more than 3. You made a lot of noise. All those against? It's carried.
It's not
Lost.
Lost. 5 points was carried.
No, and he didn't call for abstention.
Oh, abstention? Yeah.
Abstain.
The man in the corner is abstained.
Yep.
We have 1 abstention. I need to record them. So we're back to the original paper.
We don't.
Where the rest of the recommendation.
Rest of the recommendations.
So I will move 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7
That'll do you.
through the end.
Okay, will you second that, Alan?
Yeah, I'll second that. That includes 2?
Yeah, that includes 2. Do you have any speakers on yours to speak, Tom?
Nope.
Do you wish to speak, Alan? Two's good. Okay, any other speakers? Yes, Paul?
I'd just like to say, Chair, it's very nice to have that little issue that's got under my skin about delegated authorities sorted out.
Didn't know whether you got your own way though, did you?
No, yeah, I've got a full explanation now.
Okay.
Fine, good.
All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? All the other recommendations are carried. Thank you very much. That was a long, controversial paper, Tom. 7. Regional transport, Alan. Can we crack our candidates?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just very briefly, the regional transport plan, I think we advised last time, sets its priorities for bridge strengthening, particularly in the Hastings District Council area, to handle high-performance motor vehicles, plus safety measures across the region, but largely up on State Highway 2 north. However, there's been late advice from NZTA, because everything is behind with the new government, and that led us to a variation on the land transport plan, which means that we've included in there, as it says, detailed business case and pre-implementation phases for the State Highway 2 Waikari Gorge and passing opportunities projects, again, predominantly on State Highway 2 North. I've got that right. Which is quite material if you know, in 2 or 3 years' time, we can get Waikari Gorge bypass being built. It's going to make a big difference in travel time to Wairau. We have been approached for the District Health Board to have an advisory member on the committee, and the committee supported that. The DHB have an interest in walking and cycling, and obviously in road safety. There is to be a workshop held as in 4.2, and I really should just add on to that in terms of the letter of support for State Highway 38 between Wairau, Waikari and Moana to the NZ Transport Agency, Wairau District Council and the Provincial Growth Fund. So I'd actually move with that addition. And then the other material thing is that there will be a working party established to work on a funding plan for stop effluent facility in the Wairau district.
Thank you, Alan. Are there any questions? Yes, Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Alan. You had a deputation from Ken Crispin, which I, on behalf of the Citizens Environmental Advocacy Centre, and I note that you've just noted as a report. Was there any outcome from that presentation, apart from just receiving it?
Well, basically it was a repeat of what we've heard before, concerns about, in particular, noise from heavy traffic vehicles traversing on the expressway through the Piramai residential area, and obviously there's sympathy for that. There has been work done already in response to Ken's submissions to replace the surface with a low noise bitumen mix rather than chip. I guess generally he was just reminding us of things again. So it's worthwhile from their point of view because it keeps these things front of mind. But I don't. Councillor Wilson could probably advise. There wasn't really anything new out of it.
To a point, I mean, he He introduced us to his grandson this time. That was new.
Another generation.
So there's another one coming through. I think one of the key outcomes of the day, though, which is not to be underestimated, was the inclusion going forward of DHB and a member. And I actually think that, in some small way, Mr. Christman had a win there, because that he was more focusing on the health issues around the corridor, and we've responded in kind by saying, well, let's bring someone on who knows a bit about it. So,
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions? Alan, your move?
Yeah, I'll move with that addition of the words and to the Provincial Growth Fund on 4.2.
Thank you. And Senator Fenton, any other comments, Fen?
just in regard to the stock effluent, just for council's information, the Mohaka Hill is just a great green mess at the moment with stock effluent. They leave Gisborne. By the time they get to over the Wharedatas, the tanks are full just about, and it's a huge issue. So I'm pretty pleased to see that we actually have got some go forward on this. We've got a willing landowner in the form of the stockyards at Wairoa. PGG Wrightsons are right behind this. I might just make a point here, though. I think going forward, there is some precedent that we've funded this activity before, and I'll be challenging my colleagues to get behind funding this one as well, to whatever level our part of it is. There is some discussion pending in regard to NZTA coughing up quite a chunk, but before we have our first conversation, which is in a few weeks' time, I'll be able to update council more following that.
Any other questions? Any other comment? Okay, we have Alan, do you wish to have a final comment? We have a mover and seconder. All those in favour of accepting those recommendations? Aye. Against? It's carried. So we have recommendations from the Regional Planning Committee. I'll do that since I was there. We had a discussion on the oil and gas options, and we agreed that we should hold fire on that while the government sorting themselves out rather than incur a lot of costs. I noticed Maro Television and some other media picked that up. We had Tutakuri added as a candidate for outstanding water bodies after some very serious lobbying from the hapu around Tutakuri. And I guess they had a point since I've lived there for 800 years. So we agreed to that. And of course, the rest of it was followed, the tank plan change, and that was a great discussion. And the report on the planning committee itself that we've had a discussion this morning about as well. So is there any questions for people who weren't there? Otherwise, I think you're all present. Neil?
Mr. Chair, I wonder would it be helpful if the staff could perhaps work through those recommendations. The issues raised in agenda item paragraph 3 of the agenda, particularly those that information and reports requested by the RPC in regard to, say, 3.1 to 3.6. What is the current status of that reporting?
So just forgive me, Councillor, we've got two 3.1s. We've got a 3.
Sorry, yes, 2.2.
Yeah.
Yes, it's obviously cut and paste from the.
So, Councillor, you'll be aware that we were intending to hold a workshop today to further discuss issues relating to the draft plan, for the tank plan change. But we decided on reflection, given a degree of uncertainty about tangata whenua's concerns and information requests, that we would postpone that workshop in favour of a dedicated session between staff and the tangata whenua technical advisors. I can report that that meeting's taking place this afternoon. And so it's our intention to get a much greater degree of clarity around the the specific information requests and concerns that are necessary to help us support tangata whenua in their decision-making process around the adoption of the draft plan. All those documents in there, I believe, will remain on the table for provision. So, is your question, do we have? Is there a timetable around the provision of those documents?
Well, if you could go to, for example, 2.23, requests that staff prepare and present the further reports as listed to the committee, and there you've got at 3.1 the outstanding areas of non-consensus. Can you update us as to what the current state of those are? Because we have later on in these recommendations 3 of the 6 non-consensus areas essentially resolved by the RPC, but we've still got 3 outstanding. So essentially, I think I'm asking for an update as to the progress on each of those requests that they've made.
So 3 of the items were the subject of a workshop the week following this resolution, and so where we went back over the issues that were raised. So you may recall from the actual committee meeting that there was a degree of concern, which actually comes in terms of the additional resolution that was added on the day to staff's recommendations around with tangata whenua being asked to make a final decision on these non-consensus items, and it was pointed out that staff actually needed to have some degree of direction on the non-consensus items so that we could progress the discussion, so it wasn't closed to having those further matters discussed. And so they were traversed in quite depth the following Wednesday with the papers, with all the supporting papers, and I think you remember presentations from Dr. Jeff Smith on that matter. We are currently anticipating, perhaps subject to the discussions we're going to have with the technical advisors this afternoon, on the 31st of October, we will be bringing 3 additional papers relating to drinking water, stormwater, and some aspects of the proposed nutrient management regime, and so they will be also discussed at that on the 31st of October. And then in the fullness of time, we are preparing we're providing tangata whenua with an interim Section 32 report, but again, as has been discussed a couple of times, the Section 32 report does need to have a look at the final plan before it can be completely finalised. So we are providing updates and aspects to that plan to reps as we go.
Does that answer your question?
No, but
so you'll also recall that we provided at the workshop, which was also a part of the request, a timetable towards notification and when some of the decisions
so where is that?
So that was provided to the workshop. So all committee members got a copy of that.
And it was emailed to you last week.
Perhaps if I just finally have one final go at it, because I just didn't understand anything you said.
It was all in English this time. Try Swahili this time.
That's fine, Neil. I have one more go. Come on.
Have those issues, 3.1 to 3.6, been duly considered and resolved and reported as per the request made by the RPC members at that time? And if not, what is the intent to address them?
In respect of 3.1, the matters were raised and again discussed the Wednesday following this, this request. In respect of 3.2,
Just, can I hold you there? The non-consensus areas, from my recall, included 6 major issues that were under resolution or for discussion. This paper essentially resolves the recommendations to this council, resolves 3 of them, and there are 3 outstanding.
which we will be bringing to the 31st of October meeting. Yes.
Actions on 3.2, etc., 3.3.
So we also expect to bring a implementation plan, which has been provided in draft form at the initial introduction of the draft plan to the committee. Is coming back on the 31st. We have set out some in the document I've just referred to, which I'm happy to provide and circulate another copy, what an indicative time frame and steps for decisions making around what process we're going to go through following the adoption of the draft plan in terms of notification pathways. So that will be, but that is not a matter that has been resolved, and it will be a matter that for this committee, or for the Regional Planning Committee to consider. And so I think that covers 3.6 as well.
Tom?
2 questions. So the meeting on the 31st, is that an RPC meeting?
Correct.
And is the current understanding that the issues presented at that meeting will be decided at that meeting?
That's our current intention, is to do that, and we're exploring whether it might be better to reframe that meeting as a workshop prior to the decision making.
So it's a workshop, it will not be an official adoption of the recommendation?
A workshop prior to the meeting.
Prior to the meeting.
It's an all-day session of the meeting.
And if that is successful, what, can you just remind me what the timetable is then for, that we're shooting at for our final adoption of a plan to notify?
So once we have that, then we have talked about, because we're currently working on what we're calling version 7 of the draft plan, which is effectively the version that the tank group produced. Things, if we get the sufficient direction on the 31st, we will be in a position to prepare version 8, which will be the guidance from the guidance from this organisation, from the Regional Planning Committee on what the final plan looks like, and then that will be brought to council for adoption.
So somewhere.
So the next I think the next meeting following the 31st is early December. So it may be that we have to call an additional meeting, but again, I'm looking forward to the meeting this afternoon with the technical advisors to get an indication as to whether that's a pathway that remains realistic or consistent with tangata whenua's.
So if there was still a cloudy outcome as of the 31st of October, we would have to schedule another RPC meeting, correct? And then we would ideally have that before our end of November council meeting, so that the outcome of that meeting could be, so the RPC outcome, whatever it is, could be formally considered by us at our council meeting at the end of November.
That's not the current track. The current track is to take it to the December RPC meeting, early December, which would be then considered at the final council meeting of the year.
That's fine.
So that is pressing us right to the limit.
Yep.
Oh, well, in terms of this calendar year, very much so. But I think an option could be to convene another meeting in November, subject to us being able to provide the advice, but that's subject to us knowing what advice is required, what are the issues. So this is it's an evolving thing as we try to tease out from the RPC's independent advisors and the RPC tangata whenua reps themselves and the mana whenua group, what are the issues that need resolution.
So my concern is that we're not getting ourselves in a protracted negotiation here of further information, further meeting, workshop, further information, and pretty soon we're in February. it's unacceptable, isn't it? I think to the councillors at large, that's not a good outcome. So, I appreciate that you're working behind the scenes and all that is going on, but I hope we are delivering to our partners our sense that we want this concluded before the year is out. Is that our?
So we've heard that message as staff, and so we'll be conveying that message, and we'll be discussing these issues this afternoon, and eagerly looking for the feedback and direction from the technical advisors on what the tangata whenua reps' perspective on what their information requirements are to feel like they can be in a position to make a decision.
Hey, Tom, just to clarify that on that question, so our target is the last RPC meeting is on Wednesday the 12th of December, and council is on Wednesday the 19th, and this thing will be resolved one way or another by then. And I don't think, I agree with what you're saying. We need to send that message very clearly to staff, very clearly to tangata whenua, that 6 years mana whenua and people of Heratonga have laboured over this. You're not going to get consensus on everything. Everyone's not going to agree. It's going to be a big compromise for our region to go forward, and that's the deadline date. It's not going further than that. If anyone's holding it up, whether we're holding it up or the tangata whenua's holding it up, they need to have a clear message that it's not going beyond that date.
So last question then. So I would take it that under report 6.1, where our recommendations are, tank plan change, further information resolved as above. That cryptic reference is meant to suggest that our council,
all Neil's points,
that our council has now taken aboard the recommendations of the RPC with respect to items 3.1 and 3.4, which are the consensus items that Neil was referring to, and we are now officially on record by adopting this cryptic 6.1 yep, we agree with the RPC's outcome on those issues.
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Only to note that that the purpose of those outcomes was to prepare a final draft of the plan that would be considered in its totality by the Regional Planning Committee. So we're not building our adoption of the plan part by part.
We're noting that we're receiving it.
But Mr. Chairman, we've got to adopt at least 3.1 to 3.4, otherwise. What was the point the other day? We were very lucky to get those through.
The point is we're not going to relitigate them.
I mean, I would think at the very least, recommendation 1 should say receives and adopts the report and recommendations. In 1, 2, and 3.
I need some advice on this.
Sorry,
yes. Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, they were included in the overall report just to bear in mind, because the only recommendation to council was to note that the RPC had made those resolutions. They belong to the RPC. They don't belong to council.
This council has to respond to recommendations from the RPC. Is this our response?
Well, as I understand it, the RPC has not recommended that this council adopt these positions. Indeed, that would be contrary to their position on the day, which is nothing agreed until everything's agreed. So the middle ground at this point is that the RPC has adopted these positions provisionally, subject to full adoption, and once full adoption has happened, it will be recommended to the council to adopt the plan.
Mr. Chair. It's my view that Councillor Dick is absolutely correct, and you actually read it at 3 that says adopts the following provisions to be included in the draft tank plan change. That's the intent of the recommendation from the RPC. That's what it says, and we're at the point of saying the RPC has agreed to include those 3.1 to 3.4 in the plan, full stop. We won't litigate them again, whether they're in or out, but having said that, the RPC will determine in toto the document, which includes those. All we have outstanding now are 3 non-consensus items that similarly should be processed in the same way for inclusion in the draft plan and for final consideration of both RPC and Council.
So, Chair, just to clarify, under 3, it's adopting the following provisions to be included in the draft plan change version 8. So that is in the next iteration to go to the committee. It is not saying that those have been adopted for the final tank plan change. So that has not been determined by the RPC. The RPC simply on the day agreed that for the next version, this be adopted in. And furthermore, that nothing is agreed for adoption until the whole plan has been agreed.
I challenge that.
Well, that's our understanding. Well, this is verbatim what was voted on the day. So, be very, very clear. It is in relation to the next version of the plan change, and it is not a recommendation to the council that these be adopted. It is simply a noting for the council to note that the committee itself has made that adoption in relation to the next version that it itself will consider in due course.
Well, the problem with that is that you're going to end up with 3.1 to 3.4 being relitigated all over again.
Well, not necessarily, I don't.
Well, unless the council adopts them for inclusion in the draft plan.
Well, Councillor, it goes to Mr. Skirman's point that what we are not doing is adopting salami slices of the plan as we go. What you're simply doing is you are noting the progress the committee is making in terms of forming this plan, and it won't be agreed until everything is agreed, or it won't be recommended to the council for adoption until everything is settled at this point. Now, it is quite possible that there will be relitigation. That's where the committee is at.
So this is going to go on for years.
Thank you, Chair. It would be my understanding, James, it'd be fair to say that it was from my understanding from that last RPC meeting, the adoption of those particular, the settlement of those 3 particular contentious issues was simply to allow us to complete the Section 32 analysis for to go into the full tank plan change?
Well, that's partly the reason for getting some direction from the committee, but it is more broader than that. It's so that we can start refining the document that is being agreed upon.
So we have some difference of opinion whether we say receives and notes. We have some councillors want to say receives and adopts.
Receives and adopts.
That's what we have. And you think that would go beyond where our talented whenua partners believe we are?
Well, look.
You do, Tom, please?
Yes, I do.
Look, as an absolute middle ground, this council could adopt those provisions for version 8 of the draft plan change being considered, but you still, it's only a working version of the document.
Well, we've got our 2 senior staff advising us that if we did adopt it, talented whenua would look very dimly on it, and I don't think at this stage we should be taking that kind of aggressive approach, even if it might be slightly right, Neil, but it would be seen as a very aggressive approach.
Chair?
In terms that we're negotiating still.
Chair,
Yes, I really would value your view here.
But can I add my support to the position you've got on the staff on this? This is a tricky set of discussions, and I think that it would be preemptive to go and do that. And I agree with Tom's point, is that nothing's agreed until everything's agreed. And we've got a very clear step from them that they're on track with us, so we just need to get this package carefully built. And I'm not yet of the opinion that, as Alan is, that this could go on indefinitely.
The wording is quite adequate. It says, adopts the following provisions to be included in the draft tank plan change version 8. And then it tables those. If you're going to ignore them and let them go, then it's going to set the thing back again.
I mean, the beauty of this amendment when it was offered was that it meant nothing.
Councillor Curtin,
It is
very skillful.
It is just plugging some provisional provisions in a draft plan that nobody's agreed to. So, and we can all pat ourselves on the back and pretend that we've made progress.
Well, to Councillor Bailey's point, it does provide us with the basis of doing further analysis and refining the document. But look, once the committee adopted 2.3, it did effectively agree that nothing is agreed until everything's agreed. And that was the outcome on the day as a consequence of agreeing to what was put forward by Tangata Whenua.
We're going to have to move along on this. So I'm going to move the recommendations as they stand, receives and notes the report recommendations to the Regional Planning Committee.
I have a second that, Chair.
We have a seconder. I've already said my piece on this. I think Councillor Barker put it really nicely. We're on building blocks, and I don't agree this is going to go on forever. This is going to stop in December. But we do need to be fair in the process as we go forward here. And Neil was very skillful at the last meeting, and he got it all through with support, and that was a big move forward. But I don't think we should take our partners for granted or abuse our position on this matter. That's just my view. And we should go, this is building blocks. And I actually personally think we came a long way. There are a lot of frustrations for all of us because we are relitigating 6 years of work from Tank, and some of us, like Tom, went to all those meetings, and I went to a few, and it's a little bit frustrating having people relitigate all that again. But we've got a pretty tight timetable on this, and as long as all those reports get that have been requested, Tom, so that we can't be abused of holding back information. Let's give everyone, Tangata Whenua, all the information they require, and so that they can get their head around this, we can build to a solution. So that's my point. Councillor Bailey, you wish to speak as a seconder?
No.
Anyone else wish to speak?
I propose an amendment, Mr. Chairman. And that amendment is that one should read, receives and adopts the report and recommendations from the Regional Planning Committee, numbers 1 through 3.4.
I'll second that, Chair.
You want to adopt too?
And in saying that, it ties things together logically, and it doesn't override this reservation that full adoption will occur when there is a whole plan there. But we've got to take the opportunity of building blocks.
Just to add, Chair, that I don't see any of this being confrontational or offensive, regardless of senior staff view on the matter. I think this is just an obvious progression, and frankly, we're not adopting it to send it out to public notification today. We're just adopting what was discussed on the day. I think it's a prudent use of council time.
And you don't think it fundamentally changes?
Changes nothing.
It doesn't fundamentally. Alan's point doesn't fundamentally change the rest of it, does it? Probably right. Neil, you want to?
No, I do want to speak.
It still includes 2.3. Once all reports and information,
it does.
Committee will then assess and make a decision on the draft plan and accompanying documentation in its totality. There's still that.
There was a seconder for. You were seconder for yeah. Neil.
Well, my comment is this, Mr. Chair, that none of the inclusion of adoption does not preempt anything in this, and what it does is simply take it at face value puts it in, and that's why I was particularly interested in the 3.1 to 3.6 aspects of this, so that we're very, very fair, very, very responsive to those aspirations of the tangata whenua group. And I'm a little concerned that, in fact, those reporting matters have not been fully addressed, and I'd be interested to talk to Mr. Skirman about that. So having satisfied ourselves that we have responded fully, there is nothing wrong with moving forward by accepting those three non-consensus items as being effectively included in the plan, which will be then considered by the RPC. It's not preempting their pejorative rights over them in any way.
Okay, as the move of the original, I can accept that. Can you accept that, Paul? It doesn't change anything, just makes it a little bit more powerful.
6 of 1, half dozen the other. I'm fine. Fine to change if you want it.
So you're adopting the report of the committee?
Yeah, with the word
Rather
adopt.
than receiving.
Rather than receives and adopts the report. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried.
Can't see that makes any difference.
You need to move that as a substantive motion now, Chair.
No, because I just accepted it as the move and second.
Oh, they withdrew. Okay.
Yeah.
On that list of recommendations, that wasn't covered.
So what are they? Where are they?
Now, was that a vote on just this or the entire
The entire thing?
oil and gas, everything?
Yeah. So there wasn't anything else then? Yeah, no? We went from 1 to 6. Okay, thank you. Oh, crikey, we're having some discussion today, eh? So we move to fixing the common seal, item 9. Are there any comments, or do we just have a mover? Property? Yes, Paul?
Yeah, just my amusement that we're still working under the Land Drainage Act 1908. It's 110 years ago that came out.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very fine piece of legislation.
Yeah.
I must be parliamentarians were very foresighted.
Peter?
I just had a query. It says under number 2, as a result of sales, no cross leases of properties were sold, and then one single leasehold property was sold. But when you go and have a look at the sales, there are 4 listed there. Can you explain the...
I had exactly the same thought last night as I was reading these papers, but just saying that it's a timing issue.
I think it's a timing issue of when the paperwork's signed. I think these would have gone through, they would have been accounted for last month, but I think they've been detailed in this month's paper. It's just a timing issue when the paperwork's not been concluded.
So we actually are selling 4. I've got a meeting, but I'll just...
Yes. Those were transfers, they're not sales.
Oh, they transfers not sales.
Although there's 2 sales there, so
There is 2 sales.
there's 2 sales and then one. That's what I thought first of all. And
One's a
Yeah.
sale and purchase.
We're the mover.
So you're just as confused as I am.
Ben's a mover. Will you second the confused councillor?
I'll
Second.
confusedly second.
All those in favour, fix the common seal.
Can we have recommendation 4 considered separately?
Recommendation 4.
It's too late.
There's no such one.
There aren't. There isn't one.
You thought I was getting tired, didn't you? Okay, item 10, activities. Are there any questions? There will be lots of questions. I have one. I should kick it off. That Henry Trust, that application, does that have a big impact on us if they... What is the impact, James?
well, it's
Which number, Chair?
17.
17. So this is a brand new piece of legislative innovation. This is the first application we've received. We will be building the plane while flying it, so there's some uncertainty at this point as to how extensive the impact will be. But essentially it will be creating a formalised set of expectations between us about how we exchange information, how we work together, consult on a range of matters. So depending on their appetite, could go quite wide, or they could agree for it to be reasonably narrow. So it's certainly something to keep an eye on in terms of these provisions are available to every iwi entity, of which I heard yesterday, I think we're up to 27 in the region. So this could become a major body of work, and we may come back to council in the future needing more staff to manage these agreements.
Okay, I have another quick question. The wetland selection at Mohaka, what about in Mohaka is the wetlands?
Which number you're there, Chair?
Oh, for 24.
I'm sorry, Ian's not with us today, and this is...
Is it on the river or side of the river? Or?
Look, I suspect there'll be in the upper
I'll ask
catchment
Ian,
as well.
I'm just
But
interested.
It's the wetland up in Puteri,
Oh, is it?
pretty sure, yeah.
Okay. Right. Peter.
Yeah, 36 East flood report. I got approached by a couple in the last few days, and went and had a look at flooding on their property down next to Tiawonga, where, what's the stream that comes out there?
that's the Maraitotra stream.
Maraitotra stream comes out. They'd had a whole lot of material washed down onto their property and deposited there by the flood. This is a reasonably common occurrence, especially with that big rain we had a few weeks ago. And I've raised it with Gary, and he's gone and sought legal advice so we get clarity as to what our responsibilities are to sort that stuff out as a council. And I'm wondering if we couldn't get a paper to council, because I'm sure that these issues are going to be raised with other councillors as well by concerned landowners, so that we have an understanding of what our responsibilities are as a council, so that we can sensibly respond to those types of concerns that are expressed to us. Is that possible?
Yeah, look, yes, and I think it would be helpful. Yep.
Okay, no, let's get that legal thing. Tom?
Just similar to that point, I got somebody approaching me about, we apparently cleared out some riverbanks or something along the same stream, but up more closer to Ocean Beach Road. The result of which was apparently large piles of wood, trees piled up on somebody's property. And the question again was similar: whose responsibility is it to then dispose of all of that, or what's considered appropriate? Should it just be burned or hauled away, or what? So we do the cleanup, but the result of the cleanup is left as a pile on somebody's property.
Huge piles left lying around here.
Look, let's come back to you with some advice on this. We have got the works group attending the Corporate Strategic Committee meeting next week, and just in that discussion we may be able to address these reasonably quickly.
Okay, Peter? Oh, you had another one, Tom? Several or just one?
Number 5 refers to the WCO co-applicants. It says staff will be reviewing the third version for its merits since earlier versions. Since we have no position on plan change 9, whatever it is, how do we assess the WCO and on matters like low flow triggers and so forth, where we don't seem to be able to adopt our incremental progress on such issues? What do we say, and what's it based on?
So our intention is to provide a copy of the latest version and some advice to council on that. We did have a discussion about it this morning in the pre-meeting, and the request was for further advice on version 3. In principle, our response to date has been, and certainly I think our staff advice remains, that for the very reasons you've outlined, we have a range of matters that are currently under consideration within the tank plan change. Those matters overlap substantially, if not fully, the provisions in the proposed water conservation order. So while we are continuing to consider the range of stakeholder views, including those of tangata whenua, continuing to assemble things like Section 32 analysis, we're still in a process of considering what are the most appropriate protection mechanisms to achieve the broad range of community values that exist for that catchment, and therefore it would remain our view that it's preemptive to be progressing a water conservation order.
And I didn't even have to come to the meeting. Another question on the large and significant consents on 47 through 50. I don't see mention of the new water bottling consent application or transfer, or whatever it is, which under our previous policy, I'm assuming will be publicly notified. Is that the case?
So look, I would assume it hasn't been put down here because it is a transfer, and so it would not have been considered as certainly not large or potentially significant, notwithstanding the policy position. Taken some guidance and happy to take some further guidance now, given that there are a number of councillors that were not available this morning on whether the policy applies to a transfer. At the moment, it does appear that the wording of the council's policy position on this does cover a transfer where there's no new take and no change in volume or change in activity. It's just from one party to another, and in this case, one location to another.
And is the implication that by transferring it is more likely to occur?
I would make that assumption that the exercise of the consent is more likely, given that there is activity around that consent.
Well, then, in the spirit of our policy, why would there be any reluctance to implement our policy?
So probably there's no reluctance. It's just a clarity around the intent of the policy, given that this water has already been allocated and for that purpose previously, so there is an existing consent.
But they want to change location, do they?
From one side of the road to the other, effectively.
Well, that's big enough.
That's big enough.
Yes.
Significant.
Completely agree.
What
You agree?
Yeah, area is this?
I think we have a.
Awatoto.
I think we have a general consensus. We want to have our
I think
policy.
it's captured by the policy that we've.
That it is
Is
captured
that
by.
Andy Lowe and the existing plant?
Sleeping Giant Holdings Limited. I don't know who the shareholders of that are. I don't know whether you know, Malcolm.
No, I don't. There is a separate, Andy Lowe has a separate one, so I presume it's not him.
Can I just
Sleeping Giant.
Can I just add a word of caution about this? Is it might, from being particular here, is it would seem that if you adopt what's being suggested, there might be an element of retrospectivity in it. So when we did this was this foreshadowed. What you have to be careful about as lawmakers and rule makers is that things have to be known to people before they make their decisions. You can't act retrospective. So my worry about this is my concern, I like the advice is, that here we are, happily discuss, oh, well, it's across the road, that particular change, therefore it applies to it. Well, this is a significant decision. There are significant commercial interests in this. And there's also the law about making things retrospective. So when we issued the consent and when people entered into the discussions about buying and purchasing the public property, were they aware of the pending decision by the Regional Council about the transfer and about their application as policy? And if they were not, I think we have a legal issue here.
But we have a buyer beware issue here from the standpoint of whoever is on the receiving end of this transfer would have to be blind to not be aware of our policy or getting really crappy legal advice.
No, I don't think that's correct, Tom.
Well,
I do. I'm agreed with Tom. Our policy is there in the public for all to know and see.
So certainly before attempting to transfer, and there's, as I understand it, some property ownership related issues in relation to this proposed transfer. So those would have occurred in due knowledge of the council's position. So the issue's less one of retrospectivity than it is and this relates to our prior discussion in relation to tranche 2, is that the council has adopted a blanket policy that is preemptive effectively of the receipt of any application. And so a legal interpretation provided by the applicants is that the council cannot not make a decision about whether to notify a resource consent in advance of receipt of a particular application. So a policy consistent with our discussion on tranche 2 would be that decisions on whether or not to notify water bottling consents are withdrawn from staff and are a decision to be taken by council. The policy you have adopted is instead that all water consent applications will automatically be notified. There is a legal risk associated with that, which has been brought to the attention of consent staff by the lawyer for the applicant in this case. And therefore, we're advising you that there is some risk of litigation and there is some risk of the courts finding that the policy is ultra vires the act, and that in this case the justification for notification is not there. So that's just a risk that you need to confront if you wish to continue down this path.
But can I just come back to my point, is that as I just got that, is applications for consents for water bottling. Now, is this, so that's clear, but what we're confronted with here is a transfer of a consent, an existing consent. And what we're trying to say here is that it captured in that motion was not just an application for consent, but also a transfer of consent. And I didn't hear that in that. And that's my concern, that a transfer is somewhat different. If we're now going to say, the transfer of consent is part of a consent because we've decided that, well, I would say to you, you're in risk of making that retrospective. It has to be clear, and I don't think it was clear. And I'm just trying to treat us here carefully so we don't become like a banana republic.
Question's understood. I don't know whether you recall the exact advice in the original paper on this, Malcolm.
We actually came back a second time and asked for clarification on implementation, on transfers, and in that second decision, we were instructed that it included transfers.
Oh, well, if that was the case, that's your opinion. Right. That wasn't clear at the time. Thank you.
And at the end of the day, Chair, what we're talking about here is notification. It's not actually the decision about the transfer itself.
No.
It's only whether it gets notified or not.
And I guess the issue here is that notification will be a significant increase in consent processing costs for the applicant, and given the public sentiment around water bottling, there's a chance that there will be a considerable number of submissions on this, which will result in lengthy hearings potentially. So the cost to the applicant could be considerable.
As we've just established, the applicant should have been able to go into this with their eyes open, so that's fine.
Well, they've gone into it with some legal advice that the council's grounds for notification have some issues, and I guess we'll find out whether or not that's something they wish to test in court.
So we agree we're going down that journey.
Yep. But perhaps just in what James said there, they have a right to seek a judicial review on that notification decision. So it may not get notified if they were successful in that.
Yes, that's right
step,
too.
and that has a risk of in terms of cost.
Any other issues? Yes, Neil, and then Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go to activity number 49, the four resource consent applications for stormwater, and just ask the question around maybe City Council wastewater and whether there is progress in terms of current consents and future planning and consents around wastewater, particularly and including the discharge to sea.
Yes, so we are continuing to work closely with the Napier City Council on their program of works, and there are early discussions about potentially bringing forward consent renewal to reflect some of those advances in their network that are proposed. We're currently giving consideration to the recent wastewater discharge into the stormwater network and the extent to which that is legally justifiable under the Resource Management Act public health emergency provisions, and whether or not such a discharge would indeed require a resource consent. And so we're looking into that in some depth, including looking at how this is treated nationally in the many circumstances where this occurs throughout New Zealand.
So supplementary to that, Mr. Chair, can I ask that progress on those wastewater matters be included as a part of update to Council in this section? Is it possible to include all of those consents as one reporting component?
We will come back.
Thank you. Any other? Peter, then Benton.
Yeah, just above that, number 47, tomato mushrooms. The court's imposed a deadline on the company to get its application in but it doesn't say what the deadline is.
It was the 1st of October from memory, so it's imminent.
Pretty soon, okay.
Benton?
Number 40, New Hawke River Road. Would appear we're getting close to late September if they started construction. Yet.
No, not yet.
Okay, and the Waddle Riverbank, I see a digger's been along there recently, but is that just preparing for the revetment work?
This is near the playground.
Yeah.
So we're waiting for the steel product to be delivered there. So they may be prepping. I haven't been to site for the last week. So.
Okay.
So that's proceeding.
Thank you.
Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Back to 49 again. I understood that we were going to go through and do some sort of analysis on what was in Napier City Council's long-term plan in terms of their expenditure on stormwater and resolving the stormwater and sewerage issues about the discharges into the estuary. Is that still on the cards?
So we've written to them asking for a budget and timeline around their upgrade works, and I can't tell you, I'm sorry, whether we've received that written response at this stage.
Okay, that's
I
cool.
don't know, Malcolm, if you've got any update on that. No. So Mrs. Lambert wrote formally to them following that request from Council probably 2 months ago. She's presently on annual leave, and so I'm not entirely sure whether she may have something sitting in her inbox, but we'll follow that up.
Okay, that'll be cool. And then the other one is number 54. 80 new projects have been chosen to pilot to roll out. Does that include the Mohawk plan change, or?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I've got a sneaking suspicion it may do, but we'll confirm for you.
Yep.
Any other questions, staff? Peter?
Move.
Your move. Thank you, Peter. We'll move that we receive that and note that report. Seconder, all those in favour?
Aye.
I'd quite like to speak.
Oh, you'd like to speak, okay.
Just quickly, and we've obviously got quite a few new staff, so this report is about significant activities coming up through October predominantly, and it's really important as councillors, well for me anyway, that if there are significant things going on in my neck of the woods, I like to know about it, and if there are any meetings down there with political bodies like the District Council, I would like to be included as well. So just to emphasise the importance of this report is future looking, and I note, Chair, that your future looking one is absent on that
Is what?
note. Absent.
Who's absent?
Your future looking report, what's coming up for you? Anyway,
I'm
those
getting
are my
nagged by you
comments.
now. I'm getting nagged by all the... Okay.
Well, that's the Chairman's report.
The Chairman's report, yeah. Thank you, Debbie, for reminding that it's not there. Okay, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Stop for lunch, please. Now, we have some guests coming in at
1:15.
1:15.
Do we?
So do you want to do the...
No, we won't get through them. We've got 4 minutes on that clock, and we started on that clock. If you go into minor items, you know how our minor items go? You go to...
Well, make sure the Milo, give them 30 seconds. Ring the bell, chop the mic.
Is there something on this afternoon?
Yes, we have the Hawke's Bay Executive of the Federated
Rightio.
Farms coming
We
in.
are going to give minor items a go. We're going to go... We're switching clocks.
Get any notification of that?
No, I haven't either.
Really? No.
No.
Oh, I thought it was in the council diary last I saw.
It wasn't in the council diary.
So,
Yeah.
No, it's a shock to me. It's just
This one's right.
Our
who's going to
apologies,
be
I'm
here then?
not sure how that's happened.
Well, there was some discussion on it, but it has happened.
Yeah, I'm
And
sorry.
We'll have guests coming in. We're not going to.
Just, and can I just ask you all collectively to bear with us a little bit at the moment? Di Wisely is on much needed annual leave overseas for a month or so, and we are having a few things falling between the cracks because,
We usually run the council.
as you all know, Di does manage an awful lot of this stuff, and
Okay, some minor items. We have, what do we have? Heaps of them. Debbie,
Carbon Trust.
Well, I can do mine in less than 30 seconds because
Righto.
the Toki Task Force, I've updated most of that. And the other thing that I got cut off from mentioning was that the one of the key actions is doing a stock take of actually what is the size and scale of the situation in the Onga and Tiko villages in terms of any issues they may have for the summer. So that's ongoing. The Rotary Rivers Pathway Trust meeting, I've been involved in that, and also Upper Toki site visits. So the only significant thing to note is 24th of October we have an Upper Toki scheme meeting, which is looking to be quite a large meeting, so you may like to have that in your diary too, Chair. Anyone else is welcome. That's me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Was that Maori Carbon Credit Trusts?
me.
Oh,
There was an advert in the Dom a couple of weeks ago,
and on the Hawke's Bay today.
all right, about the Maori Carbon Trust, who are doing hui around the region with refreshments and a notable chairman. I'm wondering to what extent it complements or competes with the joint venture with Ngāti Kahungunu.
so we've had staff at both the Hastings and Wairau meetings on this. This essentially is a marketing front end for a well-established New Zealand company called New Zealand Carbon Farming, who've been in the business of carbon farming for quite some time. The model they're putting forward is planting pine trees on marginal land, not harvesting the pine trees and letting native reversion happen over time as the pine trees age and fall over. So it's entirely about carbon, and it's entirely using radiata pine as the vehicle for generating the cash flow. It's a much more narrow focus than what we are proposing through the Kahutira Accord and with the Council's own afforestation activity, which covers a broader range of species. This enterprise is aiming for 1,000 hectares in our region, which is relatively minor compared with the scale at which we're intending to operate over the next decade or more. So it's not unhelpful. It is broadly complementary, but it is a far more narrow proposition.
You'll keep the council informed on it?
Happy to.
Okay, thank you. Concrete for the Caraman?
Yeah, someone approached me yesterday and alleged that the concrete that was originally dumped back in April in the Karamu stream is still there and might be more of it. Can somebody just check out that situation?
So we'll certainly follow that up. I mean, the guilty party was I thought we had a prosecution
I thought so too.
on that. We certainly issued an infringement notice, but I did think it was a prosecution, and I just lost track of where that's at. So
I'll have to follow up.
we'll follow up.
I thought he was pardoned.
There was certainly an order of some kind to remove it. I mean,
Sorry, there's
Well, certainly the very first thing was an abatement notice to remove. So. Yeah.
the person who put it in abused us, so the camera was in bad shape. Not mine.
Just regarding the new PO, would you like to, James, talk about the porphyry for next Monday?
So we are hoping that we have as many councillors as possible in attendance for Peri Munro's porphyry at the Pukimoki Marae. The planned format is a 9 o'clock start for the porphyry, but for those that have been onto that marae previously, you're welcome to assemble at 8:30 and be as part of the, I guess, the Tangata Whenua group.
Is that correct, Mike? We can...
That is correct. So there's There is only going to be one porphyry. That has been the request from the marae. So yeah, hapa state certainly for those that want to sit on the paipai as part of.
You should all sit on the paipai. We've all been to that, right? Before?
To sit there as tangata whenua, you mean?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So it'll be two parts. So if we go at 8:30, they will welcome us on, and then we'll sit over there as tangata whenua, locals, and then the Wairau Whakakī group will come on as manuhiri at 9 o'clock. Correct?
Look, I understand there won't be a formal welcome on at 8:30. They only want to do it once, and so that will be for those that have not previously been on that marae, including. So for anybody that hasn't been formally welcomed on that marae before, they have asked that they go on with Peri at 9 o'clock. But for those of us that have been there before, we're welcome to join.
Because it's a community marae, slightly different to proper marae.
Correct.
Yep.
A lot of us have been there before.
There'll be a fairly substantial contingent, I expect.
Okay, lunchtime.
So we're coming back to hear from somebody, and then we're going into public excluded after that.
Correct. And look, this comes from a direct request from Federated Farmers to meet with this council. It was scheduled for a couple of months ago. We cancelled it because we had some urgent port decision making to do.
What time are we meeting?
1:15.
Yeah, and then there's just no notification that they're coming today.
Look, I apologise. I don't know how that's happened.
Well, we don't want to apologise. Someone to fall on the sword.